The Kings look to avoid falling in the standings, but they are facing the top team in the West and have a big challenge tonight. More on that on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we are on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first purchase. Happy Leap Day, by the way. It's February 29th. If you don't know, Google it. The LA Kings on this unusual day will wrap up their 3-game road trip, looking to avoid going 0-3, but it won't be easy. They are taking on the top team in the Western Conference, one of the top teams in the NHL all season long, the Vancouver Canucks, for the first time this season. As for our daily question, do we have any new news, any injury updates on Adrian Kempe, Victor Arvidsson, Mikey Anderson, or Carl Grundstrom? And the answer, unfortunately, is no on all of them. Kempe and Anderson are out. Grundstrom and Arvidsson are on long-term injured reserve. So no new update on any of those 4 players. As for the Kings, they come into tonight's game with a 29-19-10 record, 4th place in the Pacific Division, 7th place in the Western Conference, and 15th in the NHL with a total of 68 points. Kings are 18-9-4 on the road, coming off a 4-2 loss in Calgary versus the Flames on Tuesday. The Vancouver Canucks are 38-16-7, 1st place in the Pacific Division, 1st place in the Western Conference, and 2nd in the NHL with 83 points. The Canucks have led the NHL in points for most of the season, but they're currently tied with the New York Rangers with 83 points, but the Rangers do have the tiebreaker over the Canucks with 2 more regulation wins and also a game in hand. Canucks are 25-3 at home this season, but they are coming off a 4-3 home loss to the Pittsburgh Penguins on Tuesday. As a matter of fact, the Canucks have lost 4 of their last 5, so maybe the Kings are catching them at a good time. Of course, the Kings only have 2 wins in their last 5, so there's that. Kings have dropped to 19th in the NHL in goals scored per game. They score 3.03 goals per game. The Canucks are 3rd best in the NHL in goals per game at 3.62. LA is still 3rd in the NHL in goals allowed per game at 2.67. Vancouver 8th in the NHL in goals allowed per game at 2.75. Kings are currently 12th in the NHL on the power play at 22.3%. Canucks are 10th in the NHL with the man advantage at 22.8%. Kings still hold the number 1 penalty kill in the NHL at 86.4%. Canucks are 19th on the PK at 79%. Individually, the Kings are led in points by Adrian Kempe with 51, 19 goals and 32 assists, but of course he is not available for tonight's game due to his injury. Kevin Fiala is currently the Kings' leading point producer as far as players that are available tonight. He's got 49 points, 17 goals, and 32 points, and he does have a goal in 4 of the last 5 games for LA. Trevor Moore still leading the Kings in goals with 22. As for the Canucks, they have 3 players with 70 points or more. Quinn Hughes, a defenseman, has 70. Forward Elias Pettersson has 75 points, and forward JT Miller leads the team with 81 points. The Canucks and Maple Leafs are the only 2 teams in the NHL that have 3 players with 70 points or more this season. As for the leading goal scorer for the Canucks, that would be Brock Besser, who has 34 on the season. As for the 2 net minders, the Kings are sticking apparently with Cam Talbot. He checks in with a record of 16, 14, and 5, a 2.55 goals against average, and a .913 save percentage. He did lose his last start. That was the Kings' last game in Calgary when he allowed 3 goals on 36 shots. He had won his previous 2 starts before that, Before that, he had a 10-game losing skid. Canucks will counter with San Diego-born Thatcher Demko. He's 31, 12, and 2 on the season, 2.50 goals against average, and a .916 save percentage. In his last start, lost to the Penguins, allowed 4 goals on 40 shots. He is first in the NHL in wins, 10th in the league in goals against average, tied for 5th in save percentage, and he has 5 shutouts on the season. A big, good, young netminder for the Canucks, who should be in their net for many years to come. Unlike the Kings, the Canucks are set in net for now and the immediate future. This is the first of 4 matchups between the Kings and Canucks coming up this Tuesday. The Kings will be hosting Vancouver. They'll meet again on March the 25th in Vancouver, and then one final time in LA on April the 6th, at least one final time in the regular season. There is a real possibility the Kings and Canucks could meet in the first round of the playoffs. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. As for the Kings lineup, we'll have to wait and see officially what head coach Jim Hiller goes with. We know that he's more than willing to switch things up from game to game and even period to period, and we saw that in the last game for the Kings against the Calgary Flames. When you look at the projected lineup tonight for the Kings, we are expecting LA to go with the same lineup they had for the end of the game in Calgary, and that would include Alex Turcotte playing on the top line with Andre Kopitar and Quentin Byfield. He started the game as the 4th line center, but in the second period, they moved him up to the top line with Kopitar and Byfield. So a great opportunity for rookie Alex Turcotte to get to play on a line with a couple of marquee players for the Kings. The second line, which is not the nice line, more on that in a bit, is expected to be the same, the Deneau, Moore, and Fiala line. And then you've got the third line of Pierre-Luc Dubois with Jared Anderson-Dolan and Alex Laferriere, and the fourth line, Blake Lizotte with Arthur Kaliyev and Trevor Lewis. As for the defensive pairings, we'll have to wait and see, but we're going to expect that it'll be the same as the game against Calgary, which was a little bit different than we're used to. Drew Doughty with Jacob Moverara, Vladislav Gavrikov and Matt Roy, and Andreas Englund. We believe with Jordan Spence, we think that Brant Clark will be out of the lineup again tonight. And again, the netminder, it appears it's going to be Cam Talbot over David Riddick. So that appears to be the lineup for your LA Kings tonight. But again, with Jim Hiller, not sure. He is not afraid to mix things up. That is for certain. Now, I'll be honest with you. Am I optimistic about the Kings going into this game tonight? Well, not really, considering that they've played 2 lesser teams in the Oilers and the Flames, and certainly the Oilers are still a very good team, and the Kings did not win either of those games. Are they going to put 3 periods and 60 full minutes together with the injury issues they have, a makeshift lineup against one of the top teams in the NHL? Again, it's certainly not impossible, and the Canucks are not playing their best hockey of the year right now, but I'm not optimistic. What do I hope to see tonight? I hope to see the Kings again play 3 good, solid, hard periods, compete against one of the top teams in the NHL, show themselves that they can compete against one of the best of the best. And in the end, if they fall short, I can live with that. But I want to see, just again, a better all-around game from the LA Kings, get off to a better start, have more than 3 shots in the first period, which is what they had in the last game against Calgary. The game against Edmonton, 2 good first period and second period, and then the third period kind of fall apart. So again, good start, carry it throughout, play hard, play good, clean hockey, and in the end, let's see what happens. And I will say this, and I know that this isn't exactly the Kings lineup that they've had all year, but the Kings so far this season have fared actually pretty well against some of the top teams in the NHL. When you look around the league, the Kings are 6-7-1 against the top teams in the NHL. Now, that might not sound great, but we're talking about, again, the best teams in the league. And the Kings right now, you'd have to say, are at least a middling team in the NHL. You look at the top team currently in the NHL, the New York Rangers. Kings are 1-1 against them. The Boston Bruins leading their division. Kings are 1-1 against them. The Winnipeg Jets are currently leading the Central Division. Kings are 1-1 against them this season. And the Carolina Hurricanes, one of the top teams in the East, Kings are 1-1 against them. The Florida Panthers, another big team. Kings 1-0-1 against Florida. They're 0-1 against the Stars and 1-2 against the Avalanche. But again, all things considered, the Kings have been at least competitive against the best teams in the league. Hopefully, we'll see that again tonight against the Vancouver Canucks. But again, no Adrian Kempe, no Victor Arvidsson, no Carl Grundstrom, and no Mikey Anderson for the Kings. Speaking of Adrian Kempe, a doctor has chimed in about him. Don't get too excited. It's not one of the Kings doctors. And we will offer up a bit of an apology to a friend of the show. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. I don't, because I use Gametime, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. I use Gametime to buy tickets to NHL and NFL games this season, and I am a very satisfied customer. The app is very easy to navigate and use. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in pricing, and the best price guaranteed. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase, and I love that you can see the view from your seat before you buy it. You know exactly the view you're going to get when you go to the game. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. All-in pricing shows you the total up front. You know you're getting a great deal, and there are no hidden fees. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps on the app. Just download that Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDON, NHL, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. Hey, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. That would be Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today on Amazon Fire TV. Now, of course, on Friday, tomorrow's show, we are going to have our fan feedback show, but we have a little bit of feedback a day early. Couple of comments I did want to share. And this one comes from someone who's qualified to talk about injuries, and that would be Dr. Frank A. Paul in Yucca Valley, California. Now, I had said when Adrian Kempe went out with his injury and they were talking about they were going to have an MRI, that maybe that was actually a good thing, because if he had broken his finger or broken his wrist or broken a bone in his hand, maybe that was something they could detect early and easily. And the fact that they had to go look at it again, maybe that was a good sign. And I will admit, I was kind of fishing for some good news. But Dr. Paul checks in to say, maybe not. He says, quote, an MRI is used to determine if there is a hidden fracture or dislocation, often difficult to see on an x-ray. He says, a famous problem with wrist injuries and bones, especially the scaphoid bone, vascular injury or cartilage ligament tendon injury when suspected. He says, so his MRI may not be a good sign for Kempe, but we can hope, he says, cup half full. And I'm with you, Dr. Paul. I'm hoping the cup is half full as well. And look, I've covered sports, as you may have heard, for over 30 years, and I'm certainly not a doctor and probably shouldn't play one on the podcast. But I've seen and been around a lot of injuries in a lot of different sports, so I think I have maybe a bit of an educated guess at times. But I will admit that I am at pretty much a loss as to what exactly Adrian Kempe hurt, what the extent of the injury is. But again, it obviously is something more than just day-to-day, it appears. And yes, you are correct, Dr. Paul. Just because they didn't detect what it was immediately doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't going to be a big issue. But fingers crossed that we will see Adrian Kempe certainly at least in the playoffs. So I did want to also mention a message I got from friend of the show, Jesse Cohen, who you probably know. He's the host of the Kings pre- and post-game shows and also the All the Kings Men podcast. He is a friend of the show. I've been on that podcast. He's been on this one. So I mentioned on Wednesday something about the nice line and how I wasn't a big fan of that name, kind of a little throwaway line. But I was pointing out that line of Danault, Moore, and Fiala is the line that the Kings are kind of leaning on right now with the injury. Well, Jesse sent me a message and very nicely pointed out that that's not the nice line. The nice line is Philip Danault, Trevor Moore, and Victor Arvidsson. And I knew that as soon as I read it, and I feel like a dope. And then Jesse let me know, which I did not know, that he apparently coined the nice line. And he says, yes, they are all nice guys, but it's more because that trio of player produces some really nice goals, and nice as in good looking, kind of thing. So I immediately felt bad. Jesse was a good sport about it. He pointed out there was no need for an apology. But I will apologize for getting the nice line wrong, which I shouldn't have. And I will still admit the nice line, it's nice. It's not one of the greatest lines ever, but I completely understand Jesse wanting to defend something that he helped coin, and I would be a little protective of it as well. He did say that he was tongue in cheek, giving me a hard time about it, but it did get me to thinking. Like I said, the nice line, it's nice, but we talk about great nicknames and nicknames for lines in hockey. It's not something you see a lot of anymore. And it got me thinking of, are there any good line nicknames out there right now? Have there been any in the recent past? And what are the greatest line nicknames in NHL history? Just something for fun. And you might remember the Kings had the LAPD line. That was short-lived I think in the 2000s, early 2000s. Jason Allison, Ziggy Palffy, and Adam Dedmarsh. So that was the APD. And then, of course, LAPD. I never really liked that one much either. It seemed forced. I hope Jesse didn't have a hand in creating that one either. But that was the other line I could think of for the LA Kings, at least recently, and it wasn't that great. But are there any good line nicknames in the NHL right now? Now, there was one recently with the New York Rangers. They called it the Kid Line. And as you might expect, it was made up of rookies. I believe it was Alexis Lafreniere, Capo Caco, and Philip Hedl, I think. Of course, they're not all rookies anymore. They're still younger, but I don't know if that one applies anymore. And I don't even know if that one was that great. It was okay. I think the best one I can remember that was fairly recent was the Perfection Line in Boston. That was a pretty good one. And it was near perfection with the three players involved. The recently retired Patrice Bergeron, Brad Marchand, and David Pastrnak. That was arguably one of the best lines. Not arguably, it was one of the top lines in the NHL. And the Perfection Line, that was pretty good. That's one of the better ones we've had recently. One of my favorites from the not too far past was the Legion of Doom. That was in the 90s. It really fit the Philadelphia Flyers, and it was a line of Eric Lindros, John LeClaire, and Michael Renberg. They were all like 6'3" and like 220 pounds. That was a fun one. That was a really good one recently. If you're talking like legendary lines, there was the Production Line in Detroit. That was Gordie Howe, Ted Lindsay, and Sid Abel. Not only were they productive players, but that was a very cool nod to the production lines of the auto industry in Detroit. So it's always very nice when you can have a nickname that also kind of feeds into something that is local to that franchise. The Production Line's one of the best of all time. There was the classic French Connection in Buffalo. That was consistent of 3 French Canadian players, and it was also in the 70s, and there was a popular movie at the time called The French Connection. But that was Gilbert Perrault, Rick Martin, and Rene Robert. That was one of the all-time greats. Then there's one that probably wouldn't fly these days. There was the famous Kraut Line for the Boston Bruins in the 30s and 40s. That was 3 players of German ancestry: Milt Schmidt, Woody Dumart, and Bobby Bauer. It was a reference to sauerkraut, but there was also a derogatory name for German people as well. Yeah, I don't think that one will be very popular anymore. And I didn't forget, I saved the best for last, and it is one of the best all time, and it is with our LA Kings, the Triple Crown Line. Marcel Dion, Charlie Simmer, Dave Taylor in the 70s. That was the first line in NHL history where each player scored 100 points or more in the same season. The Triple Crown Line is one of the best ones of all time, and thought we'd have a little fun, talk about some of the lines. Sorry again, Jesse. Didn't mean to slight your nice line, but something fun to think about. And maybe I missed something. Maybe there were some classic ones I missed. Maybe there's a current one out there that I'm just completely blanking on. But one of the fun things about hockey, some of those good nicknames for some of the lines that were historic in the NHL. All right, we're going to check in on the latest playoff picture, tell you how it is possible the Kings could fall out of their current playoff spot. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. We are headed into the stretch run of the NHL season, and the Kings are looking to make a playoff push. But regardless of where the Kings are in the standings, you need to know that you could win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. It's the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether players like Austin Matthews or Nathan McKinnon will record more or less based on Sleeper's projections for that game, for goals, for assists, plus, minus, and more. You can do goalies as well. Talk about saves. It is not just about the NHL as well. You could also play daily fantasy hockey with NBA, but you want to win 100 times, bet on Sleeper, then you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard that right, Kings fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention, nail your picks, and you could win big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit as well. Terms and conditions apply. That's the code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availabilities. The LA Kings face the Vancouver Canucks tonight, 7 p.m. Pacific time. Catch every moment of the hometown broadcast of your LA Kings with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search LA Kings. While checking the standings in the Pacific Division and the playoff picture in the Western Conference, we will include the Vancouver Canucks in this one. Tonight's opponent for the LA Kings, they are on top in the Western Conference and the Pacific Division with 83 points, 10 points clear of the second place team in the Pacific. That would be the Vegas Golden Knights. They've got 73 points, and they are in action tonight facing the Bruins in Boston. So a tough game for Vegas. Edmonton is 1 point back of Vegas for that second spot in the Pacific. Edmonton with 72 points. They picked up 2 points last night with a 3-2 overtime win over the Blues. The Kings sit in fourth place in the Pacific with 68 points, and that's good enough to be the number one wildcard team in the West at the moment. Nashville has 68 points as well. The Kings, though, hold the tiebreaker, and the Predators are in action tonight as well. They will be in Minnesota to take on the Wild. Calgary has 63 points, 5 points back of a wildcard spot. Then you've got St. Louis also with 63 points. Mentioned they lost, but they did pick up 1 point for the overtime loss to Edmonton. And then you got Minnesota sitting at 62 points. So with a win, the Kings cannot move out of the number one wildcard spot. The best they can do is maintain that position. The Kings can fall out of the number one wildcard spot and into the number 2 wildcard spot with a regulation loss and a regulation win by Nashville. If both LA and Nashville lose, or if they both lose in overtime or a shootout, then the Kings would maintain that number one wildcard spot because they do have the tiebreaker. If the playoffs started today, the Kings would be the number one wildcard team. They would face the Winnipeg Jets in the first round. Winnipeg is tied for first in the Central Division with Dallas, but the Jets do hold the tiebreaker at the moment. So if the Kings do end up, though, losing that number one wildcard spot and they fall in the number 2 spot, they would likely match up against the Vancouver Canucks in the first round of the playoffs. So there is a real chance tonight's game against the Canucks could be a first round playoff preview. Just adding a little extra to tonight's matchup. Of course, we all remember the last time the Canucks and Kings met in the playoffs. Vancouver was the number 1 seed, like they would be right now, and the Kings were the 8th seed. And of course, the Kings won that, went on to win the Stanley Cup back in 2012. We would love to see a repeat of that, obviously. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Friday, of course, we will recap the Kings-Canucks game. Hope to have some good news to talk about, and of course, have another Kings fan feedback show. If you want to take part in that, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. Get those emails in as soon as you can if you want to get in on the show. And of course, we always welcome your comments on the YouTube episodes in the comment section below. We would love for you to stay interactive with the show by following us on X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. Looking forward to seeing what the Kings do against the Canucks. And as always, go Kings, go.